Welcome to orientation. Tonight I'll be talking about just who we are, a little bit about REFOREST London and the Westminster Pond Centre and some of our programs. And then we'll get into all the different ways you can volunteer. And then also talk about just why we need trees. So why is it such an important issue in London? Even with every other issue going on, why is it still super important and connected to all these other big issues? You can learn a little bit more about London's urban forest and how to plant a tree, and a bit about some native trees and non-native trees, and our sponsors. So I always want to just start off by acknowledging that here in London, we're in the treaty territory of the Anishinaabe, which is defined within the Pre-Confederation Treaty known as the London Township Treaty of 1796. So throughout time, this region has also become the current home to the Haudenosaunee and Lenape nations. So that was provided to us from Chippewa's attempt. And as an environmental organization, we try to collaborate and be as inclusive as we can and learn more about what we can do to appreciate nature, as well as the Indigenous folks who have always stewarded the land before so many people were here. All right, REFOREST London was founded in 2005, so we're 15 years old now. And we started as a project of the Urban League. So if you're familiar with the Urban League of London, they coordinate the neighborhood associations, and there's a lot of other members of this kind of network. And so at the time, there were just some citizens that identified that we were losing a lot of trees. A lot of trees were dying from old age, diseases, development, all kinds of things, and not being replaced. And so they did a couple of pilot projects, and then out of it, some really eager board members actually formed an organization. And then, so now it's actually our 50th anniversary this year. So since we began, we've just grown exponentially. We started out in someone's basement, and now we are just in a big office space. We've grown to about 10 plus staff, and we've planted over 76,000 trees and shrubs, engaged volunteers over 61,000 times, and just the number of events that we do for such a small staff is pretty incredible. We had almost an event every single day last year.
Wonderful.
So whether it was going out there and planting trees or just educating people about trees, giving seedlings away, all kinds of things. So our mission is that we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to partnering with our community to enhance environmental and human health of the forest city through the benefits of trees. And our vision is seeing Londoners thriving in a healthy urban forest. And we're focused on three main goals, the 3 E's, which are empowerment, so empowering people to take it upon themselves to get involved and to feel like they can make a difference. Ecosystem health, so obviously by planting trees, we want to improve the biodiversity and bring back a lot of the native tree species that are often being threatened by a lot of different things, and education. So whether it's formal education or more just like online education, a big part of what we do is about also teaching people about the importance of trees, how to plant them properly, how to care for them properly, so that we not only have more trees, but we take better care of our trees too. So in October 2019, we became the official founders, and we did an official launch event for this new huge project that we're doing. So some of you may be familiar, maybe you're not, but where our office is located, it's behind Parkwood Hospital, and it's located in some their historic veteran rehabilitation centers. Sorry, I'm just admitting people as I talk. But yeah, so there's 4 buildings behind the Parkwood Hospital in London where it was built during World War II, and veterans, it was a recuperative village for them. There were bunks as well as a community center, and now, so they were owned by the hospitals, but they wanted to divest the property. So that's where our office has been for many years. And so we decided to take it on, and we're actually turning it into London's very first ever environmental center. It encompasses 4 buildings in total, like 14 acres of land, 2 baseball diamonds, and it's adjacent to the Westminster Ponds trails. So if you've gone back there, a lot of people park at the tourism building and go in the trails there, but a lot of people also park back there to go explore the ponds. And so basically the goal is to renovate these heritage buildings in a very sustainable way and make just a center for education, for all kinds of environmental programming. And so it's going to be very collaborative. We're going to have a lot of different tenants and different organizations renting space for events. It'll be a demonstration site for renovations, green buildings. And really, we're kind of modeling it after a few other similar organizations that exist. And it's really going to be a catalyst for environmental change. So our goal is really to move the needle in London, just help people really, take on the challenges of climate change and all the major environmental issues we have. So it's a bit different from just tree planting. So some people think, oh, why reforest London? And part of it is just that we're London's leading environmental charity, and we had the capacity to do it. And we saw a gap in the community. So I'll talk a little bit about the building. So this one, the Bruce Pavilion, that's where our office is. Not currently, we're still working from home, but sometimes we go in safely to run some events that we're doing. And it's also the offices of the Thames Talbot Land Trust, another great organization, as well as the London Environmental Network, which we actually helped to found a few years ago. And then the building next to us, it was vacant for a while. It used to be the Radar Museum, and now just in the last year or so, the Thames Valley District School Board has taken it over. Them too, they're not in it right now, but this fall they will be. So they have this outdoor education program for high school students where they can spend a whole semester learning like leadership and just environmental stewardship. It's all kind of worked into the curriculum. So it's really neat.
Yeah.
And finally, the Bruce Pavilion. This one is still not renovated yet. There's big plans, and there's nothing official that can be said really, but it will be an Indigenous health and well-being center. And yeah, so we're really excited to have a nice mix of different like services at the site. Oh, and finally, actually I didn't really mention, but the large building at the end, the Wellington Pavilion, that will be the last one to be renovated. It'll be probably an event space of some sort, and really kind of like the capstone or the center of the project. Okay, so back to Reforest London. So I'll start talking about the different programs we have. This one here, Celebration Forest. So right in this area that I was just discussing, right next to it, there's this giant field next to the hospitals, like right across from Victoria Hospital behind Parkwood. It used to be a big field, but they let us actually plant trees on it. And so every year for the last 10 years, it's been a fundraising event where people can buy a tree to plant in memory or in celebration of a loved one. And then once a year we have the planting event where people go out, plant their tree, the name of the honoree goes on the sign, and it's our only ongoing fundraising initiative. So people can do it anytime. They can just go online, buy a tree as a gift. A lot of companies do corporate gifts for retirees and things like that. Yeah, and it's also a really nice opportunity to volunteer. So it's an annual event. We always need lots of volunteers. And actually, so usually it takes place in May, but this year we're doing it in September just because we pushed it back to figure out how to do it safely. And so right now we're actually recruiting because in, I think a week from now is the event. So if you're interested, usually it's the tree specialists, the more highly trained volunteers that we'd be looking for, but there is still a need. So you could actually just let me know. Just send me an email or let me know tonight, and I'll make a note of it. Yeah, so another thing that we're really well known for is being a co-founder of the Million Tree Challenge. So if you're not familiar with it, as simple as what it sounds like, it's the goal is to plant 1 million trees in London. It can be any species planted by anyone, anywhere, just as long as it's within the city of London. Oh, thanks, Leanne. I saw your note there. Great, okay, the chat is working, so if anyone ever wants to message in the chat, go for it. Yeah, so this is not just trees that we plant, this is us also encouraging other people to plant trees from, you know, nurseries or wherever, but the key is they have to register them. So right now, we're actually at 452,291 trees, which is great. We've been doing it for about 9 years now. Actually, we still have to add about 1,000 or 2,000 trees that we gave away this spring. So it's really closer to 53 or 54,000. Yeah, so the key thing though is to go to milliontrees.ca and register trees. So it's a simple process. You just put in your name and your address of where you planted the tree and the type of tree. And that way it's just a great type of communication to encourage people to plant more trees. And it's actually a huge initiative too, where we collaborate with lots of community partners. So right now there's 213 on our list, and these are all like businesses of different sizes, other nonprofits, just any group that wants to support the challenge. There's lots of ways for them to do it. So I guess I should just mention too, if you work for a company, work in HR, or if you're just super keen on doing something with your green committee, yeah, you can also reach out and just explore the many different ways that a company can support the Million Tree Challenge. So if you're going to your company and wanting to support the Million Tree Challenge, how do you make your case? Well, I assume you're here because you already care about the environment, so you probably already know a lot of these things, but there are just so many good reasons to plant trees. There's environmental benefits, but there's also economic benefits and social benefits. So just a few examples pulled from this graphic study show that living near trees and well-landscaped grounds can improve your health and happiness and well-being. There's a study that showed that if you had just 10 more trees on your street, it was equivalent to being 7 years younger for air conditioning costs and heating and cooling. So trees that are properly placed around a building can reduce your air conditioning needs by about 30%. So it can greatly reduce your bills. And the beauty of trees and greenery can raise property values about 15%. So there's a lot of benefits that are obvious, such as creating oxygen, but other things that people don't know of as much. Like even shoppers have indicated that they would be more willing to spend more time shopping if there were more trees in their shopping area. But yeah, so there's some obvious ones like removing air pollution. So of course they absorb CO2 and produce oxygen, but they also absorb other pollutants as well. So for instance, like car runoff, when they absorb the water, they're absorbing some of that pollution that is not running off into the river. And actually by absorbing that, it helps it go into the ground and get filtered out so that the water gets cleaned. Reduced heat, urban heat island effect. So if you're not familiar with that, it's just the idea that all these black, dark colored surfaces in a city from all the asphalt and rooftops, they absorb a lot of heat and they really increase the temperature within a city. So having trees really has an immediate effect on the microclimate that you're in. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty aware that when I go for a walk, I'll cross the street if there's more shade on one side of the street, and then I'll cross again just to kind of maximize the shade above me. So as mentioned, reduced heating and cooling costs, and of course the emissions that come with that. You know, if you're using less natural gas, it's less emissions. Carbon sequestration, so yeah, absorbing CO2 from the air, food and habitat for wildlife. Since moving to London, I've realized there's huge populations of people who love to go out and hike, and there's so many active groups like Nature London and Thames Valley Trail Association. So there's so many people who just love going out and looking at the birds and wildlife. And they're able to support a whole lot of that. And decreased stormwater runoff and soil erosion. So we all pretty much live close to the river, or pretty close. So they definitely help with just decreasing flood by absorbing a lot of water, keeping the ground in place so that it doesn't run off. Yeah. And economic benefits are reduced infrastructure needs for stormwater management, increased spending in treed neighborhoods, increased property values. Social benefits, so social connectedness and higher life satisfaction, increased sense of safety, higher performance of students that are able to see trees outside their windows. They just have a calming effect, improved stress recovery. So I know that in people in hospitals, they have a quicker recovery if they have more of a natural landscape to look out of their window. Reduced mortality if you have a lot of trees around you. And yeah, shorter hospital stays and even decreased painkiller use. So I think I've updated the slides, but yeah, another thing I usually mention is people are just more likely to be more active and be more, spend more time outside. So adults are much more likely to go for a walk, and kids are much more likely to just play in their backyard. Okay, that's kind of the end of the section. So I'll just check and see if there's any questions. People saying they're interested in volunteering, that's great. Yes, I'll get into the opportunities soon. Do the trees the city plants as boulevard trees automatically get counted? That's a great question. So once a year, we'll reach out to the city forestry department and ask that they register their trees. So yes, the city is a co-founder with us, and so they're very, very supportive of it. Actually, a lot of our funding comes from the city. And so yes, they do register the trees that they plant on the street. So if the city comes and plants a tree on your street, you don't have to register that one. You would just register any trees or even shrubs that you buy at a nursery. We also do tree giveaways, and you actually don't need to register those because it's easier for us to just do it for everybody. What sort of trees does REFOREST plant? I'll get into that a little bit later, so I think I'll hold off for now. But remind me if I forget. Okay, so picture this, London in 1840. It's a very long time ago. But so they say, even then, they started calling us the Forest City. Now you may think we're called the Forest City because we have a lot of trees and we have a lot of nice forests. But at the time, they originally called us the Forest City because people who traveled to visit London had to go through endless forest to get to it. So as with many other cities in the 20th century, especially like the 1960s, there was a ton of urban sprawl, just a lot of suburbs popping up. And with that, you know, you cover a lot more space and there's a lot more places to plant trees. But at the time, a long time ago, it was basically a small town surrounded by trees. But in the century or almost 2 centuries since, there's been tons of deforestation, not just in the city, but also surrounding the city. So I'll get to this a little later, but just the region that we're in used to be nearly completely forest and wetland. So the forests have had a big toll. So that's why we're called the Forest City. We used to be a small town surrounded by forest. Yeah, but now we're kind of trying to keep that name going by giving it a new meaning. And now by planting a lot within the city, there's a lot of benefits, and yeah, we can adopt that new meaning of it. So we talk a lot about London's urban forest. What is the urban forest? Well, it includes pretty much any tree in the city, whether it's a street tree, residential trees, so trees in your yard, trees in parks, green belts, ravines, along ravines, so anything along the river or the creeks, pretty much all working together makes the urban forest. And they say that a healthy city should have about 40% canopy cover. So that's a good measuring tool to know how healthy your urban forest is. And so canopy refers to the amount of space covered by a mature tree when it has all its foliage out. And so London only has about 24%. And however, the city does have a target of getting up to 32% by 2055. So it's a long process because it involves planting, but it also involves time for those trees to mature because they're very small for a long time. But luckily, the city does have pretty lofty goals. I'm not super familiar with some of the cuts due to COVID, but I know that the long-term plan is just to do a lot more planting and a lot more caring for trees too. Okay, and as far as the property value goes, if you just look at these photos, there's just such a different feel in one neighborhood that has a lot of trees versus a neighborhood that may not have as many trees. So there's just a picture of Old North where there's almost 40% canopy cover, and then Sunningdale has only about 5%. Yeah, so it gives you an idea of, I guess, what a super healthy neighborhood looks like. And it also points out the differences between neighborhoods, because a lot of people are often shocked that we have a low canopy cover, but it's just because it's not evenly distributed. Some places have a lot more and some places have a lot less. Yeah, so as mentioned, the land surrounding London used to be very forested. So we're located within the Carolinian zone. So the Carolinian zone is dictated by the kinds of plants and animals that you find in that zone. If you go further up, you get the mixed deciduous and then the boreal, but down here, we're at the northern range of it, because when you think Carolinian, you think Carolinas, you think the US, and so this zone does continue down south, and so we're at the northern range. And an interesting tidbit, I guess, is that with climate change, as things get warmer, a lot of the species will stay the same here, just because they'll be moving north, but it'll be the same species, basically. Maybe some different ones or some that are just more adapted to hotter temperatures, but yeah, and so this zone, something that's very interesting about it is that it makes up a very, very small portion of Canada, only 0.25%, so 0.25 of the landmass, but the population of Canada, 1 in 4 people live there. So 25% of the country lives in that tiny little zone. So it's incredibly highly populated, which means there's just a lot of pressure from all kinds of development, whether it's agriculture, cities, and roads, and all that. Yeah, so along with that, it's also a very, very, it's a hotspot for biodiversity. It's just naturally an area that has a lot of plants and animals that can live there, and a lot that are unique to that area and don't exist anywhere else in Canada. And so naturally, I guess with all this development, there's also more endangered and rare species in the Carolinian zone than any other life zone in Canada. So there's that stat that I said, and these graphs just show that so before like European settlement and all the development that we've had here, the zone used to be 80% forest, now it's only about 10%. 28% used to be wetlands, and now only 5%. So it's unfortunate, and clearly we need more trees, and we definitely have the mindset of think globally, act locally. What can you do right here in your own community? So that's where you come in. So now I'll talk about how you can volunteer. Okay, so first, why volunteer? Well, you may already have your reasons, but there's so many reasons. So you may agree with one or more of these. So you get to meet new people. A lot of the people who volunteer, they get to know each other and become friends, and they all kind of share common interests. They're usually all pretty like caring about the environment, or like being outside, like nature, that kind of thing. You make valuable contacts and connections. So also if you're on the younger side and you're trying to develop a career, you know, you can get a great reference from it. Gain new skills and knowledge. So, you know, a lot of people are not that familiar with how to plant a tree properly or how to care for a tree properly. And then if you do more training with us to be like a tree specialist, for instance, you can learn more about the different types of trees that grow here. Fine tune your craft. So if you're already super into it, we can just support that. And of course, that feeling of giving back to your community. So yeah, for our higher level roles, such as the ones that you do with the training you're doing tonight, we have quick calendars where you can sign up. So online, we have this volunteer application form you can fill out, and then you have this giant list, and you can check off all the roles you're interested in. And then from there, we put you in our database and add you to email lists for all of those roles. And then we'll send you the calendars to sign up for opportunities as the opportunities arise. So sometimes there may be times where you don't hear from me for a while, and the truth is we're very seasonal based. But you do get added to our lists, and whether it's going to be a photographer or, well, I'll talk about all the different roles, but we will let you know when the opportunities come up. And another way to just find out about our upcoming events, if you haven't already, is to sign up to our monthly newsletter, because a lot of our events are just posted in there. So how to be a good volunteer. So of course, we're very welcoming to a lot of people. I know that, so during COVID, we've started asking for people to register in advance before they come out to a planting event or an aftercare event. That's so that we can kind of control the number of people that are there. But for the most part, it's still open to the public, and it's all ages, families, individuals, groups like corporate groups. So we're very accommodating, but we just ask that you put safety first. So hold your personal safety and the safety of staff and other volunteers and community members as your highest priority. I guess it's more relevant now than ever with keeping distance, and we ask that people wear masks. And so we're going to start our tree planting events for the first time since COVID began. And so we're going to be sanitizing shovels in between use. And usually we bring snacks and water, but we're not going to do that this year just to prevent the sharing. And gloves. So we usually bring gloves for everybody, but now we're just asking that people bring their own gardening gloves. Yeah, so choose your words and actions carefully. So especially if you're in a role where you're maybe representing us at a booth or more in a leadership position, we certainly want you to just be aware that you're the face of REFOREST London, be reliable, and have fun, of course. So if you are at an event and anything happens, we just want you to know that we have a zero tolerance for violence policy. So a lot of the events are out in the open, and there's a lot of people around, so you never know. Usually the only issues we have are the occasional neighborhood resident who comes over and for some reason really doesn't want trees to be planted because they block their view or something like that. But if you ever had some serious issue or an injury or something, we have our incident reporting forms, and we just ask that you report it to staff and like whoever is in charge, if it's another volunteer or a staff person. as a volunteer, you're never expected to have to stay. If you ever feel unsafe, you can remove yourself from that situation. And then, yeah, if you ever have concerns, we just want you to feel like you're able to come to us and let us know. I think I actually already mentioned most of these, but yeah, perks of volunteering, there's also research that says it boosts your well-being, helps build your resume, and we make a lot of effort to make you feel like you're a valued part of the team. And a part of that is actually our recognition system. So I know most people just, you know, they like to volunteer because they feel good about what they do, but there are some perks too. So for instance, we have some free t-shirts that you can get after you've volunteered 3 times, and the training counts, so this counts for all of you. And then you can receive a free tree gift. So that's a tree in the celebration forest. You can get a tree in your name, or if you want to give it to somebody else, you can do that. Also give Mountain Equipment Co-op gift cards after 30 events. And then on a monthly basis, we have our volunteer spotlight, where we highlight a really outstanding volunteer on our website and in our newsletter. And then annually at our annual general meeting, we'll have a top volunteer award for usually 2 or 3 volunteers. Okay, so how to get involved? Well, now I believe this is a bit of a summary. Yeah, okay. There's a lot of ways to get involved. So this training is a prerequisite for some other trainings, such as our tree specialist training and community liaison training. But there's a few things that you really don't need any more training for. This is enough. So for instance, our park naturalizations. That's our tree planting events and our aftercare events. So it's where we plant trees and where we go back to the trees to do weeding and take care of them. So you don't actually need any training for that one. Like I said, now we just ask that people register. So we used Eventbrite and it was online. Yeah, and then there's neighborhood tree depots. That's our tree giveaways, where we have basically, yeah, depots set up with about 200-300 trees, and it's usually first come, first serve. This year we've changed it where people order them online in advance, and then they come at staggered times, and the volunteers come and help just put the trees next to their car, and then they put them in their car, and we maintain distance and everything. We have tree teachers. These are volunteers who educate the public about tree topics. So we have a few different educational PowerPoint presentations about different topics, like the value of trees, talking about different types of trees, and we get requests to have them deliver presentations. So you can become a tree teacher, and you can also request one. So if you wanted like a lunch and learn presentation at your office, or anything like that, like scout groups, we do a lot of like scout group presentations, guest speakers at neighborhood association meetings, stuff like that. Yeah, church groups. Then there's Seeds to Forest. That's our school program where with elementary schools, we go in and we plant trees in their schoolyard and do some presentations about trees. We have had volunteers interact in a few different ways for that program. We've had some lead some nature hikes for students, and also during COVID, while the schools were shut down, we actually had volunteers go to the schoolyards and check up on the trees and assess how their health was doing. So we're often pretty creative with creating new volunteer roles. And hike leaders. So there's, we've been able to offer free certified hike leader training through Hike Ontario a few times, and in the future, when we can offer it again, we will be able to. So that's a neat kind of training that you can get by volunteering with us. And then we often do series of summer or fall hikes where we hike, but we also talk about trees and teach people about trees. So those volunteers actually learn how to lead those hikes. And then we also do things like seedling giveaways and TREECYCLE. So I'll talk a bit more about that. Yeah, okay, so to talk a little bit more about each of them, So the park naturalizations, what is park naturalization? Well, it's not just planting trees, but it's creating a whole restored habitat, creating a whole ecosystem. So it's planting trees, but then people also stop mowing the lawn, so the grass kind of grows up and all the little pollinator species start coming up, and soon enough you see all the insects and birds come back. So this is very much focused on pretty much any public land, whether it's parks or land adjacent to neighborhoods like around stormwater ponds. And so we work really closely with the city to figure out where to plant, and then those are our public planting events. So we also sometimes have private planting events that are sponsored by a company. So if a company wants to sponsor a whole planting and bring out their colleagues and they all plant together, that's an option as well. There's pretty much a huge list of places to plant, so we're not running out anytime soon. Yeah, so it's in spring and fall. So yeah, the plantings are spring and fall, and then in the summertime we do aftercare. So the aftercare events are laid out very similarly, except they're usually in the evening on weekdays when it's not as hot. Whereas the planting events, I should mention, are usually on weekends, either in the morning or afternoon. And so actually there's a lot of planting events coming up, and we are right on the verge of putting them up. Actually, I think a colleague might have even started putting it up on the website. So those dates for the fall are coming very, very soon. And I should mention, we actually didn't do any tree plantings in the spring. And there's a lot of uncertainty about funding. So we're really happy to be able to, just letting somebody in. Hello, Jean. We're really happy to be able to plant trees again this fall. Yeah, and just so you know, like I said, you don't need any training to come, but we do train people on site. So our staff and our tree specialist volunteers will help you out and make sure you're planting it properly and do demonstrations, things like that. So it's very family friendly. You can bring kids of any age, really. Yeah. So if you enjoy doing this, you may also want to be a tree specialist. So those are the people that basically help run the events. Yeah, and so aftercare usually involves a lot of, like I said, weeding, also adding more mulch, fixing the tree collars, sometimes painting on deer repellent if it's an area with a lot of deer, sometimes picking up a little bit of garbage. And these events tend to be a little bit shorter, like 2 hours versus 3 hours. This is really great for high schoolers too. It's in the summer, and so a lot of high schoolers will just accumulate all their high school volunteer hours by doing a lot of this. It's also great if you don't have your own home. You know, if you really have the urge to do some gardening, but you don't have access to green space, it's a great option for you. There's a couple of quotes just from some longtime volunteers. Someone saying, just feels like a great way to give back and something that helps generations. Yeah, someone just enjoyed doing something that he's able to bring his kids out and to be able to get outside. Yeah, so it's also a great way to pass on your values, I guess, to the next generation. So usually when I show this slide, it's like, look how long that line is. Now it kind of takes on a new meaning, but still. So our tree depots are where we give away free trees to people to plant in their yard. So it's very much like public land versus private land. This is for any private land. So usually how we do it is it's just first come, first serve. We give away free trees. We go to different locations around the city so that it's easy for people no matter where you live. And the photo below is from our first ever fruit tree depot, where every single tree was either an apple or a peach or a pear or a hybrid of a few different fruits. So that was very, very busy, and we're very proud of how successful those events are. And so that's the one that, like I said, this year we've adapted them to just have like an online reservation in advance. And actually, I should let you guys know that we're going to put the website up on September 12th, somewhere between the 12th and the 14th. And I know last time we ran out of trees in like a day. So if you want to watch our website, you can reserve some trees to get some for yourself. So once again, we do these in spring and fall. And that's because those are just the best times to plant trees. It's not too hot. It's better to plant trees when they're dormant or near the dormant stage. Yeah. So I learned a fact that was about 89% of the plantable land in London is actually privately owned, whether it's commercial or residential. So it goes to show that there's a lot of planting that needs to be done more on private land. And so I guess an easy way to do that is just to give trees away for free, reduce the barriers for people. Okay, so once again, tree specialists also help run the tree depots. So they talk to people about what conditions are in their yard, they talk about what size of tree they want, and stuff like that. So they really know a lot about trees and how to plant them properly. So in order to become a tree specialist, first you take the orientation, and then we have a 2-hour in-class session, which is going to be a webinar. And then after that, we have a hike. And so usually we do that once in the spring, once in the fall. This fall, actually the in-class session is next Tuesday. So if you want to do that, I'd highly recommend you sign up. Even if you can't make it live, I'd still recommend you sign up because we'll send you the recording. I don't think we're going to do it more than once this fall, so I'd highly recommend it. And then we have not set the date for the hike yet because the person running it is on holidays, but when she gets back on Monday, I'll set the date as soon as I can. And then there's an online quiz. You just ask the quiz, and then at your first event, you're a tree specialist in training, but then you're good to go. Yeah, so as mentioned, you're more of a knowledgeable tree planter, and you assist the first-time tree planters at the planting events, and you help run the depot. So it's a nice leadership role. And Phil said it's an amazing way for me to give back to my hometown and learn a lot about trees to boot. All right, so another program that we have is the seedling giveaways. Now, this has not happened this year, unfortunately, because we usually bring seedlings to big community events, such as the Western Fair or Forest City Road Races. Those are some of the big ones. And then we'll have volunteers just kind of speak with people, tell them about REFOREST, and give away the seedlings. So we'll probably start again next year. But we'll see. But anyway, over the years, we've given away about 45,000 seedlings. And so that's not only more trees going out there, but it's a lot of more like one-on-one conversations that we can have with people, which is a great way to talk to people. And people actually order them too. So sometimes order them through us to give them away at their wedding. Or National Forest Week is kind of like our main holiday. It's towards the end of September, and a lot of people order them to give away at their business for National Forest Week. So for example, MPP Peggy Statler, she often has some every year, and she'll give them away to the people who stop by her office. Yeah, so as mentioned, we're not doing it this year just with the uncertainty of everything, but hopefully next year again. And so the types of volunteers who run those events are community liaisons. So they do seedling giveaways, but they also do just other events too, like some volunteer fairs at Western or Fanshawe. There's really a big variety of events that they go to. And sometimes they also just help with special events like the Celebration Forest, pretty much anything that involves a lot of talking to people. So if you're passionate about the environment, but you're not as into the really physical, getting dirty aspect, but you love talking to people about your passion for trees, then this is definitely the role for you. You often get to sit down, and it's not physical. You get to hang out at Covent Garden Market sometimes and sell t-shirts. And so yeah, sometimes the booths have different focuses. Sometimes it's giving away seedlings, sometimes it's more just trying to promote selling promotional items. Yeah, it's really diverse, and it's nice because it's all throughout the year, whereas planting is only spring and fall. Sometimes we go to like holiday events or events just all throughout the year. So for this one, there's one more training session. I have not set the date for the next one, and I actually don't think I'll hold another training session this year just because we haven't had any outreach events to go to, but hopefully in the spring we'll hold that again. So I talked earlier about tree teachers. So those are people who give talks. So it's also another great role if you like talking to people. It's a great way to practice public speaking. It's also really great for anybody who's maybe like a retired teacher or who wants to become a teacher. So no matter what age you are, of course you have to be 18 plus, but actually, I guess not even. If you're a student and you want to give a talk at your school, hey. Yeah, so we have talks on native trees, threats to trees, and the importance of trees. So this one too, I have not set the next date, but most likely in the spring of 2021. So similarly to the community liaisons, you take the orientation and then one more session where we actually go through those presentations and talk a little bit about how to be a good tree teacher. Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We go into elementary schools. We actually have a 4-part program where first we talk to people about trees, and then we do a site assessment exercise where we actually get the students to go out and identify the soil and the moisture of their schoolyard to figure out what species to plant, and then they plant trees, and then when they plant seedlings, they plant little acorns and they grow them in their classroom, and then they get to take them home. And then they also come out to the Westminster ponds and we do an educational hike. So that's been going on since 2018. We've actually worked with schools for a long time before that, but it's really grown from, we used to do about 10 schools a year, now we tend to do about 30 schools a year. So yeah, it's been great. We've been able to do both like public and Catholic school boards and even some French schools too. And more recently, as mentioned, we've started offering some hike leader training. So if you want to lead a hike, that's a really high level role, that's for you. We have the funding to offer this training again. It's mostly just kind of based on the COVID situation. So I'm not sure when the next time this one will be offered, but if you're interested, as mentioned, even if you've already filled out a volunteer application form, but you want to fill it out again just to add a few more, check off a few more boxes, you can go ahead and do that. I should mention, if you want to do that, you go to reforestlondon.ca, click volunteer, and then volunteer application form. All right, so TREECYCLE, this is another thing that's coming up really soon. We help people get rid of unwanted trees. So of course it reduces our costs because we don't need to order as many trees, but if you have, say, a big property and a big tree and a lot of the little saplings are starting to come up around the tree, but there's no room for them, you're just going to mow them down. Instead of mowing them down, you could actually pot them up, wait about a week just to make sure they survive, and then bring them to us. So we have a couple of official TREECYCLE days where it's actually September 16th and 17th, so Wednesday and Thursday of 2 weeks from now. People from 5 to 7 p.m. they can drop by our office and donate the trees. But if that time doesn't work for you, you can just reach out and we can arrange a time. And also, if you don't have pots, we have a room full of pots. We jokingly call it the pot room. So just let us know and we can meet up and give you some pots. And it counts as a donation. So you actually get a tax receipt in the same way that you would be if you donated money. Okay, so I've talked a lot about different roles, but there's actually even more roles you can do too. So we are pretty open to different skills that people bring. So you can always kind of let us know if there's some, gap you identify that you think you could fill. But we have committees, we have boards. So if you're into that high level volunteering, we have office assistants that do a lot of, administrative work and data entry, that kind of thing. We can take graphic design. I'm just checking the questions here. What is the tree mascot? So we have this tree costume. So if you're into that kind of thing, often it's the really big outreach events like the Western Fair or Go Wild, Grow Wild. People can wear the costume, walk around, and give people brochures and talk about trees. Okay, so let's see. I'm a little slow. I'm going to try and get through a few more slides, and then the time is that I'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions. So I'll try and get to the questions at the end. Okay, so helpful things to know. How to plant a tree, few common trees in London, and how to help promote native planting. Okay, so some good basic things to know about tree planting. Like I said, trees like to be planted when they're dormant. So similarly to having dental surgery, if it's going to happen, you'd rather be asleep. So when a tree is dormant, aka the leaves are not on it, that's when it prefers to be planted. So that's why spring and late fall are good times. That way they can put all their energy into establishing roots. Actually, especially in the fall, they can focus on establishing their roots instead of having to all of a sudden put all their energy into creating new leaves. So you want to know your location, know your soil type, your moisture. Is it dry? Is it close to a river? Is it super sunny or already shady? And then from there, you'll have to figure out, okay, what species will do best. And as I mentioned, planting season, so is a great time of the year. Call before you dig. So before we plant anywhere in parks, we always make sure there's no, wires under the ground or anything. But it's the same in your own yard. So if you want to plant a tree, we always suggest that if you don't already know where the lines and pipes and things are under the ground, you should call Ontario One Call. It's a free service. People will come out and make a map for you to kind of draw out where you can and can't put a tree. You should do that at least 1 week before digging because it'll take a bit of time for them to come out. And yeah, as mentioned, it's free. So a bit about how to plant a tree, just really some super quick basics. They say to put it as deep as the pot and 3 times as wide. So a common misconception about trees is that the roots go really deep, but they tend to go out really far, but really shallow. So you want to give it a lot of space. You'll always want to add some mulch to it, just to help keep the moisture in the ground and prevent weeds from popping up. The base of the tree should be level with the existing soil, so you really don't want it to dip or be too high, because you don't want water to pool, but you also don't want all the water to run away. All right. So the other thing too is not all trees are viewed equally, I guess, as far as should you plant them or not. And this goes back to someone's question from earlier, which was, what trees do we plant? Sean's question. So we only plant native trees. The only exception is that sometimes for our tree giveaways, we give away some fruit trees, like apple trees that are not technically native, but there's just such a huge demand for edible trees, and you know, it's good to be eating local, so that's kind of the only exception that we have. But yeah, so what's the difference anyway? Well, native species naturally occur in our ecosystem. They're not here through any human intervention. They're well suited to the environment, and they're also well connected with other native species. So there's nothing that really dominates anything else because they've all been together for so many years. So some great examples are sugar maple on the Canadian flag, so everyone knows that one, makes maple syrup. Pawpaw, this is a really neat tree. It's more of a tropical tree, but it does occur here naturally, and it makes a fruit that's kind of like a mango mixed with a banana or a guava. Tulip tree, this is probably the most iconic Carolinian species. When you think of the Carolinian zone, you think of a tulip tree. One of the biggest trees that we have, and also just supports a huge amount of birds and other wildlife. So not all trees that are not native are horrible though. Some trees that have been introduced, they're just kind of neutral, like they don't dominate the other trees, but they may usually just not really support a lot of wildlife. So most of the time, if it's not native, a lot of the insects don't really know what to do with it, and birds may not eat it. So they're not necessarily bad. So basically, if you have them, I wouldn't recommend you take it out of your yard or whatever, but I'd avoid planting them. So we don't plant them in park naturalizations, for instance. So one great example is the Japanese maple. I love this tree. It's that tree that's red all year long, or most of the year. Also magnolia. I feel like I have a lot of those in my neighborhood. I live in Old South. Little leaf linden. And then you have your invasives. So these are the non-native trees that are introduced, and they just do so well that they just take over and they cause a huge threat to the native trees. So these ones should be not planted in any case and should even be removed if possible. Oh, someone's just asking what the website address is. Our website is just reforestlondon.ca. Okay. So some examples of some invasives, the Norway maple. This is unfortunately a very, very, very common tree in London. And also the problem with it is that it hybridizes with the native sugar maples. So it's getting even harder to identify them. And a part of the problem is just that they get so big and they shade everything out and nothing else can really grow beneath it. Tree of Heaven. I find this one kind of looks like a sumac, but I've just heard it's really hard to eradicate it if you have it. And you may or may not know this one, but it's actually, by stem count, it's the most prevalent tree in London, the most common tree in London. So once you know how to identify it, you see it everywhere. It's along the Thames Valley Parkway, it's in the Westminster Ponds, it's in a lot of the protected natural areas. It just spreads like crazy through the ground and through the berries. Yeah. So how do you know if it's a native tree or not? Well, actually, I will share this in a follow-up email, but we have our own brochures that we've created, choosing the right tree and choosing the right shrub brochures. And then, you know, anything that's like a government website like Parks Canada or Natural Resources Canada. There's a few apps you can use like LeafSnap or iNaturalist. Those are good for identifying trees when you're out and about. And when you can, yeah, so promote native. So order trees for your yard or when needed on city property. So if you see that the boulevard on your street could use a tree, you can call the city and let them know. And of course, come get a tree from us. And then, of course, take care of the trees you have, give trees as gifts, or let your municipal leaders know that you want them to keep funding trees. Other than that, so that's about it for volunteering, but as mentioned, there's lots of ways you can donate as well, financially or trees. You can also donate your old car through Car Heaven if you want. Yeah, so that's actually it for us. I'll just give a shout out to our sponsors. Canada Life has been the lead sponsor since 2009. In addition to financial support, they also come out and volunteer and plant trees a lot with us. Yeah, thanks to all these other folks. Oops. So that is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for taking part. If anybody wants to head out, feel free. I'll just say thank you, and I'll follow up with an email with, I actually have a quiz for you guys. So we've started doing that, and especially because a lot of people are just going to be tuning into the recording, I'll just have this quiz so that they can demonstrate that they watched it. So it's not too hard, I hope, but I'll send that along with some resources. Okay, where can you sign up for the tree specialist training? I'll send you the link. It's on our website if you go to volunteer and volunteer training, but I'll also send you the link to your inbox. Okay, let's see. I need to drop off to join another meeting. Oh, okay. So I just wanted to follow on the kinds of trees. I always wondered and looked around during my bike trails, why don't I find trees that bear fruits or berries like the ones on Toronto Island? Okay, so when he goes around the city, he's wondering why there aren't as many fruit and berry trees. I am not exactly sure. I mean, a lot of the street trees are planted by the city, so it would maybe be more of a question for them, but I think in general, they try to plant a diversity. So a lot of our native trees maybe don't produce edible berries. Although I know there are a lot of mulberry trees around that I've seen. What about GIS? Actually, yes, that is one of our ones on the list. So when we do our planting, when we plan our plantings, there's a lot of creating maps to figure out where the planting is going to be and stuff like that. So yes, mapping is definitely one of those things. All right, well, I'll just give it another second if there's no more questions in the chat. If you have any other questions, feel free to unmute. I'm fine with that now. All right, otherwise, my email is volunteer@reforestlondon.ca. I'm happy to answer any other questions you end up having, and I really hope you'll all come out and volunteer. Have a great night.